Star Trek V: The Final Frontier. The worst of the 6 original Star Trek movies according to most fans and Gene Roddenberry himself, the founder of Star Trek, who went so far as to say that the movie never actually happened in canon. There are many reasons why fans did not really like this movie, from the special effects to pacing to elements of the plot itself. And this was supposed to be William Shatner's movies to direct, his baby, but due to many issues with cost overruns, a bad special effects team, and many other problems, it's debatable about whether Shatner was totally to blame for the quality of the movie. He certainly wasn't, but maybe he was a contributor to the quality to some degree. But let's do a hypothetical rewrite and retelling of Star Trek V in narrative form. We're going to change some of the characters and antagonists around, and we're not going to go to the center of the galaxy in a matter of days with the Enterprise this time to look for God. This just doesn't really fit with the technology level of Star Trek at that time. And we're not going to introduce a brother for Spock, just to cause Spock a few seconds of hesitation to defeat him as a plot MacGuffin. We can do better than that. I've taken a lot of fan input to try to get this right, and I wrote about 3 different drafts, and I thank you all on Patreon and YouTube, because those comments really did help with ideas and helped me to eliminate a lot of silly ideas I had. So here's how I would present this story in a more interesting way, but first, there is some essential background events that I need to establish. So, we will cover an event that happened some 15 to 20 years earlier than the events of the movie, borrow a little bit of information from a cutscene from Star Trek II, and a novel that was written to flesh out one of Star Trek's most beloved secondary characters, Saavik, who may actually be half Romulan. I'll explain. There was a deleted scene in Star Trek II: The Wrath of Khan, where Spock explains that Saavik is slightly more emotionally volatile because she is in fact half Romulan. This scene was deleted, and then later on it was decided that Saavik was full Vulcan, but that's kind of unofficial as well. There was a novel called The Pandora Principle that fleshed out this even further. So let's start with a prelude that touches on that. About 20 years earlier, on a planet called Helgard, just in Romulan space, the Enterprise finds several hybrid Vulcan-Romulan children living like animals after following a trail of a lost Vulcan ship. One of them was a young girl that Spock saw great potential in and took her under his wing, and went on a sabbatical to Vulcan for many years and practically raised her with great difficulty as a Vulcan. This becomes Saavik, who has followed Spock's example and joined Starfleet. Now, I have read the novel, but it's been many years, so it's not clear if these hybrid children were being deliberately bred. I'm going to postulate that these hybrids were bred for a reason, which will become clear later on in this video. Meanwhile, in the present, Saavik is already the first officer aboard a Larsen-class destroyer, the USS Comet, and the Comet is responding to a distress call from Nimbus 3, the so-called planet of galactic peace near the Romulan neutral zone. When the Comet arrives in orbit of Nimbus 3, they find hundreds of transports in orbit, and then the Comet is hailed. Saavik acts as if she has seen a ghost. The man that appears on the view screen introduces himself as Sybok, and is requesting asylum for 10,000 Romulan colonial refugees, with possibly more to come. Captain Babs of the Comet says that he is aware of the deteriorating situation of the outlying Romulan colonies under their current tyrannical praetor, and they have his sympathies, but that the fleet must hold position while he confers with Starfleet Command. Sybok responds with a flash of anger due to the suffering that his people have already endured, and that it is their wish to reunify with Vulcan. But he eventually calms down and then gives Saavik a long and emotionally labored look, and then tells them all that he will patiently await their response before cutting the signal. Saavik tells Captain Babs that Sybok is in effect her half-brother from Helgard, and she had assumed that he was dead. Captain Babs begins communicating with Starfleet Command to decide what to do with all these Romulan refugees, fearing the possible repercussions from the Romulan Empire. Meanwhile, many of the transports decide that they are tired of having their people in space and begin landing on Nimbus 3, as even though the planet is mostly arid desert, it is better than being cooped up in the ships for months. Meanwhile, Saavik contacts Spock and lets him know about the situation, especially with the appearance of Sybok. Spock calms Saavik's conflicted emotions, broiling beneath the surface, but the transmission is suddenly interrupted. The comet is being jammed. Saavik returns to the bridge to see that a Romulan Winged Defender-class cruiser has decloaked on the comet's 6. The Romulan cruiser immediately unleashes a barrage of disruptors, and the comet shields are no match for it. The Romulans score a direct hit on the engineering, and the comet is unable to respond and has to switch to battery power just to keep life support online. The Romulan commander Diov of the Abyss Glider warns that they are lucky to be alive, since aiding Romulan fugitives is a major offense to the Star Empire, especially where the terrorist known as Sybok is concerned. And then the Romulans head to ground, boldly taking their actual ship into the atmosphere of Nimbus 3, something that this Romulan ship can apparently do with no issues. Meanwhile, on the Enterprise, Spock informs Kirk that Saavik and her ship are likely in trouble due to the situation on Nimbus 3. The Enterprise receives approval to travel to Nimbus 3 from Starfleet Command, with orders to de-escalate the situation. When the Enterprise arrives, they find that almost all the Romulan refugees, including Sybok, have gone to ground, but the Romulans are hovering above Paradise City, threatening to wipe it out if the terrorist Sybok is not handed over. Kirk's orders are to de-escalate the situation, so they devise a plan to negotiate with the Romulans, but also extract Sybok. Saavik, Kirk, and Spock will go on an undercover away team to attempt to find Sybok. They eventually do find him, and when Saavik reunites with Sybok, she is unable to control her emotions beneath the surface. She embraces Sybok with tears. But during the course of the conversation, Sybok goes on a tangent about the oppression of the Romulan Empire on their outer colonies, and kinda has a fit of rage. As the rage boils over, Saavik, and even to some degree Spock, feel such empathy that they also find themselves inexplicably near a state of rage. Spock notices that this is anomalous, and through his Vulcan control and sober thinking, he is able to realize that Sybok is like a psychic emotional transmitter, making those around him feel what he feels without even realizing it, especially other Vulcans and Romulans. Sybok decides that for the good of the refugees, he will give himself up. He does not believe that the Romulans will harm them if he and his inner circle are apprehended. Saavik is overcome with emotional concern and insists on going with Sybok. While both Kirk and Spock seem to realize Sybok's apparent telepathic abilities, Spock discreetly attaches a beryllium patch on Saavik's clothing, and although she is overcome with emotion now, he reminds her that she must remember the discipline of her Vulcan training and make her way back to him in the future. The Romulans agree to beam Sybok, Saavik, and a few others to their ship. The Abyssal Glider leaves Nimbus 3 and begins heading to Romulan space. Kirk and Spock return to the Enterprise and see that the tracking of the Romulan ship is going well. But after several hours, they notice the Romulans alter course to an unknown heading, nowhere near the Romulan Empire. The Enterprise decides to follow from an undetectable distance. Meanwhile, on the Romulan ship, everyone seems to have developed an unprecedented amount of empathy for Sybok. They all feel what he feels. Even the commander has put her loyalties to the Romulan Star Empire aside and vows to help Sybok in his goals. Sybok then reveals that his main goal is connection and unification of all Romulans and Vulcans, but he is not powerful enough alone to do this, and that they must first go to an uncharted system and retrieve the Unifier, which is a sentient, non-corporeal being that can help unify all those of Vulcan heritage. Sybok later confides in Saavik that he was bred for a purpose on Helgard as part of a genetics program to enhance the latent psychic abilities of the Romulan people. In this way, they could breed Tal Shiar super agents. Sybok also reveals that his capture by the Romulans was all part of his plan, and he's becoming stronger and stronger with his psychic abilities. He's being called from a distance by the Unifier. The Romulans finally arrive at their destination, and they find an ancient, mysterious ghost ship that seems to be of Vulcan origin. Sybok is insistent that the Unifier must be on board, although he is not really sure what he's looking for. They beam over to find Vulcan corpses here and there. No one is alive, but they eventually find something. A vaguely Romulan or Vulcan-looking being made up of a kind of eerie blue light. It says that it's been expecting them, and everyone falls to the ground, weeping over the being's great beauty, even Savick. The Romulans bring the Unifier back aboard their ship. Sybok decides that they need to take it to Romulus to make the Romulans finally see that they must reunify all peoples of Vulcan origins. They get underway, but during the journey there is just one little problem. Everyone who has come in direct contact with the Unifier, within hours after, they seem to experience a severe crash into a state of hopeless depression, agitation, and sometimes violence. This includes Savick, but thanks to her training, she's able to keep her cool and investigate the situation. And she finds that everyone is experiencing an enormous dopamine crash after a period of no contact with the Unifier. And this dopamine crash leads to severely unstable emotions. She approaches Sybok with this information, but he violently denies her findings. She begins to suspect that this Unifier is really more of an emotional psychic predator, preying on the emotional energy stirred up by the Romulans and Vulcans. While the Romulan crew become more and more unstable, she takes the opportunity to get a transmission to the Enterprise to report what is happening, and she shudders to think what would happen if this Unifier gets loose on Romulus, as she is barely holding it together even with all of her Vulcan training. The Enterprise plots an intercept course. Due to her marginally superior speed, she is able to reach the Romulans just as they are entering the Romulan neutral zone. The Enterprise hails Sybok and tries to make him understand the danger of what is happening. By now, Sybok is irrational, unstable, and riddled with rage, and he tells Commander Diov to attack the Enterprise. Commander Diov's mental state is so erratic due to her contact with the Unifier, she is too impatient to plan a proper attack. The Romulan cruiser unleashes an attack on the Enterprise too early before they are able to close and use their deadly plasma weapons. The Enterprise is able to reluctantly attack the Romulans from a comfortable range and disable their most potent weapons. The Enterprise closes to transporter range while the Romulan shields are down, and they're able to lock onto Savick, Sybok, and the Romulan commander, and they beam them aboard. But they're interrupted when a small Romulan task force decloaks. A tense standoff ensues. Kirk explains the situation to the Romulans, hoping to de-escalate, but they still want Sybok, probably to continue to study him for their psychic enhancement program. It seems that only Commander Diov is able to convince the Romulan task force not to attack the Enterprise. Spock and Savick think they can rehabilitate Sybok if they can get some distance from the Unifier. Perhaps on a planet like Pajem, a Vulcan monastery colony, he can be retrained and get control of his emotions and psychic broadcasts. The Romulans reluctantly agree, but then to everyone's shock, remotely trigger the self-destruct on the Romulan cruiser. The Romulans explain that they cannot take any chances from the crew of that ship or that thing over there getting loose. By the end of it all, Sybok eventually goes to Pajem with Savick's blessing, there to begin a long recovery from the Unifier's influence and to gain control of his ability to project his emotions into others. Back at Nimbus 3, the Enterprise begins escorting the refugees to planets within the Federation that would have them, mostly Vulcan colonies and a few others. While watching the fleet from the observation lounge, Kirk, Spock, McCoy, and Savick consider how easily sentient beings can be manipulated through their emotions, chasing stimulation in an endless cycle that often goes nowhere but ruin. But Kirk, with a smile and a glint in his eye, reminds everyone that there are emotions, or rather authentic feelings, that cannot be manipulated. like the proven trust among comrades and friends, or the long-term cultivation of curiosity, the need to know what is really happening beyond the turbulent surface of things, in the spirit of true exploration. And in the end, this is what saves the Vulcans, the Romulans, and what might save humans as well. So hopefully you guys enjoyed this rewrite, which addresses a few problems. Star Trek often wants to explore the concept of God, and the Unifier could also have been a kind of false god, especially for the Romulans and Vulcans, who are, of course, an allegory to us humans in many ways. We eliminate a number of superfluous things from the original script. We don't need to travel to the center of the galaxy, which would take decades. We have no need to introduce Spock's brother, who in real Star Trek seems to never be seen or heard from again, and instead we get to flesh out our favorite Vulcan female character, Saavik, and we get some Romulan content that was never really explored that much, especially in the movie era, instead of overusing Klingons. And Klingons are nice and dramatic, but Romulans, who are pretty much space Romans, can easily be just as dramatic in a slightly more sophisticated way. Thank you for watching, Space Friends. I also want to thank my Patreon supporters for being especially patient with me. I often do 3D renders for them for certain level tiers. Don't worry, I haven't forgotten you guys. This particular video took a lot more time and attention than I was expecting, and I've had a lot of family stuff going on this summer. But feel free to check out Patreon. Be sure to subscribe, like, and comment, and tell me if you think this was a fair rewrite. Until next time, Space Friends.